Okay, we're going to continue our study on Esther. Now you can't study Esther without studying the other people around Esther. The events of what happens in the book of Esther results in a feast, a special celebration that Israel will celebrate from this time on, even into the time of Christ. It's called the Feast of Purim, P-U-R-I-M. The Feast of Purim, the word Purim means lot, kind of the casting of lots, and I'm not really sure why it got that name, but it did. And during that time, the week leading up to that, and Purim is a feast that's held about a month before Passover. And what they would do, this is more of a local celebration. This was not a go to Jerusalem and celebrate thing. This is something they did in their synagogues, they did in their homes. And they would have a reading of the book of Esther. And whenever they got to the name Mordecai or Esther, there would be kind of a cheer and blessings pronounced. And when they got to the name Haman, they would stamp their feet, they would rattle things, they would jeer whenever his name was mentioned. And you're going to find out tonight why they reacted that way. In chapter 2, we'd already covered how the king had set up a procedure where they were going to search for a woman that would take the place of Queen Vashti. So they had a lot of the young ladies of the kingdom come in, and starting around verse 8, we find out that Haggai is the one who has taken custody of Esther. He's watching over her as well as some others. And we're told that she found favor in his eyes. Now I want you to think a little bit about what the typical lady was like that was coming into this, basically a contest. They are competing against one another, aren't they? Y'all ever watch the TV show Bachelorette or Bachelor? Which is the one that has all the gals on it and just one guy? The Bachelor? You can tell I don't watch those. But at any rate, I've seen enough of the commercials to know there's lots of drama going on in both of those shows. And I can just imagine it's got to be something similar to that or even worse, because the implications of who wins this are lifelong. I mean, life-changing, to become queen of the entire nation and empire as well. So Haggai is in charge of all these ladies. What do you think Haggai's opinion is of a lot of these ladies? There's probably a few bridezillas in there, aren't there? Probably so. But Esther finds favor in his eyes. So what does that tell us about Esther? She was an exceptional young lady. Now, she does not tell anybody her nationality. Mordecai had told her to not tell about that. Why would she not tell that? The Jews were kind of in captivity here. This is an area, though, which they had been captives. They'd been allowed to go home if they wanted to, and a lot of them stayed behind. But there's still that kind of a stigma attached to them because of that captivity and the conquering of Israel. Yes? Because of Haman. You had people like Haman in the country that hated the minorities, you might call the Jews in this case, that hated the outsiders in this case. And so she's told not to make this known. Plus, apparently, this was not on this was not one of the questions on her entrance form. They didn't ask. So there's an old tradition: don't ask, don't tell, right? So she doesn't tell, and it comes in handy later, her not telling any of this. And throughout this, if you want to read one single book that will give you a great picture of the providence of God, this is the book to read. There are so many things that happen where everything just fits into place, even though there's a lot of uncertainty in the story and in the events of the day. I'm sure that everyone felt a great deal of distress, but we're allowed to see the hand of God in the way the story is told, even though God is not mentioned. Well, Mordecai has prompted her to do all of this. Mordecai has instructed her some things. And Esther shows somewhat of her character here in that she is listening to Mordecai. She is following his advice. And we're going to see where she's listening to Haggai as well and following his advice. But Mordecai is going back and forth every day just to keep tabs on how Esther is doing. She is kind of taken away from the public eye for the most part. But Mordecai has a little bit of an inside track, and so he is close enough to check on her every day. There is a time that they're being prepped for all of this, a 12-month prepping of these young ladies for their beautification. You remember in the book of Daniel, the young men who were chosen to take part in special training, they were given a special diet, weren't they? And Daniel and his friends said, we're not supposed to be eating this stuff. And they said, just give us some vegetables, give us the basics. And the guy that's in charge of them said, you're putting my neck on the line here, because if the king comes back and you guys are looking haggard and unhealthy, and he finds out it's because I'm withholding the king's diet from you, I may lose my life. They said, well, just give us a test, 10 days. For 10 days. Let us eat what we want to eat. Let the others eat what they want to eat. And then check us out. The king's not going to be checking on us before then. So he does, and he finds out they're more healthy looking. So he lets them go ahead. But there is this idea that you get on this special diet, have these special procedures done to you, it'll make you better looking. And so here we are told a little bit about this beautification time period. 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with spices and cosmetics for women. And then the women would go into the king and were able to take with them from the harem anything that she wanted, or anything she asked for. By the way, do you know what the word harem means? It's a Hebrew word, of course. It means devoted. It's very similar to the word that's used when God tells the Israelites to go into battle, and they're able to take anything except for some things. Remember Achan? He took some things under the ban. And the word ban there is the same word as harem. Things that are strictly devoted to one person. And so a harem is a group of women who are devoted strictly to the king in this case. Now, the ladies are going in, they're trying to make their impressions on the king. They're all told you can ask for anything you want. Haggai tells Esther, what was her other name they gave her? Hadassah, yes. They would go in different times, and she's told what she should ask for. And so she does. This is in verse 15. She didn't request anything except what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the women, advised, and she found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And she was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal palace. And the king, verse 17, loved Esther more than all the women. And she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he had set the royal crown on her head, made her queen instead of Vashti. And now she's queen. They have a great banquet, celebration, and still she has not revealed her background. They apparently did not require a birth certificate at that time. So she has won the contest by following the advice of others, plus because of her character. Then the storyteller on this, we don't know who this is that's writing this down and has told the story, tells about Mordecai. It's very common for him to sit at the king's gate, and he finds out about a plot to kill the king. He keeps his ears open, keeps his eyes open. And when he finds out about the plot to kill the king, what does he do with that knowledge? He tells Esther. What does she do with that knowledge? Tells the king. Does she tell the king how she found out? Gives him Mordecai's name, yes. So the king investigates this. He finds out that indeed this is a plot, and these men are hanged on gallows. And it was written down in the book of the Chronicles in the king's presence. Now, that sets the stage of something that's going to happen later on. This is written kind of like a movie or a TV script, where they start introducing things that they're going to bring out later on. It's a very effective method of storytelling that's used here. The king promotes a man that is not really a good person. Promotes him to a high level, and everyone's supposed to bow down to this man named Haman. And everybody bows down before him except for one person. Who's that? Mordecai. And they asked Mordecai, why are you transgressing the king's command? And anyway, he basically tells him why. As a Jew, he was not permitted to give homage or worship to men, just to God. And so they wanted to see if his reason would stand, because he told them he was a Jew, and apparently that was just pretty much enough. Why are you not bowing before Haman? I'm a Jew. Oh, okay. But Haman doesn't like this. Verse 5 tells us he was filled with rage. Here's a man that's dissing him publicly. And Haman probably fears others making fun of him. And you have to remember, going back to chapter 1 and 2, what happened when the queen disrespected the king. She was out. No longer queen. I don't know what happened to her, but she's gone after this point. And Haman feels like he deserves the same kind of respect. And here's the person disrespecting him. So he's going to decide to do something, isn't he? Verse 8. He takes his dislike for one person and applies it to an entire nation of people. Now that is showing the world's worst kind of prejudice, inferring that one person is representation of all of a people. So he goes to the king. He tells the king about this people. There's a people that live within our boundaries, and they are not like us, and they don't respect our laws, and they don't do things the way we do them. It's not to the king's best interest to let these people stay. And he said, if you will decree that these people should be destroyed, I'll pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry the king's business to put in the king's treasury. 10,000 talents. I don't know how much money that was, but it sounds like a lot, doesn't it? Bribery, paying somebody to get your way. That's nothing new, is it? Yes?
I read something about one area that the reason why the king took his bride is because of all the wars that he had been fighting. That he was running low on money himself, and kind of needed money in the treasury. I don't know how true that is, but it kind of makes kind of plausible, for a person to come up with 10,000 pounds of silver or whatever. Probably others who might need money, for your soldiers or whatever. So, they say who's going to refuse money, it's in power.
That could be very true, and it would also explain that Haman is quite the opportunist here to take advantage of that situation. So the king signs a law. Oops. King signs a law decreeing that this is going to take place, still not knowing who it is that this is going to happen to. Apparently he does not care at that point. And the copy of the edict is in every province, and it's in the languages of all the people, that they would be ready for that day. Mordecai finds out about this. He goes into mourning about this. He goes as far as the king's gate. Can't go in any further, because if you are in mourning and wearing sackcloth, you don't go where the king is or where the king might see you. Very oftentimes, kings were under a lot of stress as well, and they didn't want anybody raining on their parade. You remember in the book of Nehemiah, how Nehemiah is cupbearer to the king. He's one of his most trusted people. He's in the king's presence a lot of time. He finds out about the distress that the people of Jerusalem are in, because the walls are broken down, the gates are burned with fire, wild animals are coming in and out, the people have no security there. The worship in God's temple has fallen into almost non-existence. And he's praying about this, but he's trying not to be sad in the king's presence. But one day, his face betrays the sadness that's in his heart. And the king says, why are you sad of countenance? This is the sadness of your spirit. We're told that Nehemiah was afraid. And he prayed before he answered the king. He was afraid because you don't put a downer on the king's day. You know, if you're going to do that, you might lose your head. Kings were that powerful, and they felt like they were that important, and that was important enough to them. And so Nehemiah feared because of that. And apparently this is the same attitude here in Esther 4. There are some that come to Esther and they tell her about Mordecai, how he's dressed, what's going on. And she summons Hathach, verse 5, from the king's eunuchs, to go to Mordecai to find out what's going on. So he goes out to Mordecai. Mordecai tells him everything that's in this edict. And he returns that information back to Esther. And he wants Esther to do something with this knowledge. What is it? Tell the king. She's got to intercede to the king on their behalf. Esther does not really want to do that. Why? Yeah, there was a law there, and the law was you don't show up unannounced in the king's presence. You don't invite yourself in. As a matter of fact, if you show up unannounced and you have one chance of living, and what was that chance? The king had a royal scepter, and he would extend that. Remember the old movies about the Roman Colosseum, the gladiators fighting, and one of them would fall to the ground, and the other would pause over him with a sword? What was he looked to the crowd. What was he looking for? The emperor. As Wes showed, thumbs up or thumbs down? What does thumbs down mean? Killing. This is the same idea here, the scepter. You're going to die, and the king doesn't have to do anything to let you die. They say, king, this person came in unannounced. All the king's got to do is just sit there and look at you. And they say, okay, kill him. He has to take an active role here, extend his scepter to save their life. And Esther says, I haven't seen the king for 30 days. Now, when you are isolated from someone, has your imagination ever taken over about why this person hasn't spoken to you for a while? Do you ever think, did I do something wrong? Did I make them mad? I thought they would call me by now. I thought they would send for me. I mean, she's basically, she's the king's wife. It's been a month. Why? Yeah, she's got a secret she's been keeping too. I would think that Esther would say, wait a minute. Maybe he found out I'm a Jewess. Maybe he's mad over that. Maybe he's just thinking of the appropriate bad thing to do to me because I've withheld that from him because I'm one of those people. And now Mordecai says, oh, go to the king uninvited. And she says, well, you got to understand something. Verse 13 and 14 are one of the most famous passages in the Bible with a wonderful lesson here in chapter 4. Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. That would play to Esther's insecurity about her secret, wouldn't it? That would say, listen, you're not going to escape. If he knows you're a Jewess, you think you're going to be accepted from all of this? But at any rate, he goes on, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. He said, if you balk, you're going to lose, you and your father's house. I don't know if he's referring here to the destruction that's promised against the Jews, or if he's referring to the fact that if you do not do God's will, you will not prosper. You will not stand. And then he poses that what if here. What if the reason you have gotten to this point in life is so that you can act and you can save your people? And when you think about that, we could say the same thing for us on so many different levels. Why are you where you are when you are? You know, Paul talks about it in Acts chapter 17. God has set our boundaries. God's the one that decided that you and I are going to be born in the time period we were born. That this soul came into being at a special time that God chose, and a special place. Have you ever just sat up and wondered, why wasn't I born in Mongolia? You ever try to imagine yourself as being another person, or maybe in another time? Huh? You can't what? Can't speak Mongolian? I bet if you were born there, you could. Probably could. Hypothetically speaking. Have you ever learned to speak hypothetical? Okay. At any rate, I've wondered that briefly, but then again, it's one of those wonderings that really doesn't work because we can never know those things. All we do know is we are here now at this time. And whatever happens before us, there's got to be a reason why we're here at that particular time. Something that we can do to change people's lives, perhaps, to make a difference in other people's lives. After that short speech by Mordecai, which was also a very effective speech by Mordecai, Esther tells him to go back to Mordecai to assemble all the Jews found in Susa, the capital. She said, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will fast in the same way, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai does what she has asked. There is a word that's not used here in conjunction with fasting that we assume was also happening during those 3 days and nights. What is that? Prayer. That they are praying. You know, Nehemiah, going back to him, prayed for God to soften the heart of the king. And he did. So now we have 3 days where the people are fasting. And I would imagine they're not only fasting from food, some of them are probably fasting from sleep as well. And you know what? If I was in their position, I might not be able to sleep either, knowing what the future may hold for me. I don't think I would do very well in sleeping. After the third day, Esther goes to the king and invites him to a special banquet. He extends to her the royal scepter, and she makes that invitation for him and Haman to come to this banquet. And so the king and Haman are advised of that. They go, they drink the wine at the banquet. In verse 6, this is chapter 5, the king says, all right, what's your petition? Even to half of my kingdom it will be done. In other words, Esther, you got my heart. I'll give you half of everything. Her request is that they come again to another feast, another banquet that she would prepare. And then she would tell him tomorrow the thing that the king is asking or saying for her to do. So Haman's in a pretty good mood, isn't he? He got to go to this banquet. He and the king, the only ones invited. And now he's on his way home. And guess who he runs into? Mordecai. Mordecai doesn't rise up before him, doesn't bow down before him, doesn't tremble at the sight of Haman, and he goes home filled with rage again. Now, verse 10. I love this section here. Haman sends for his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches and the number of his sons, like his wife would forget that. And every instance where the king had magnified him and how he had promoted him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the king to the banquet which she had prepared tomorrow. Also I am invited by her with the king. Yet this does not satisfy me. Every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it, and then go joyfully to the king, with the king to the banquet. And the advice pleased him, and he had the gallows made. Now I want to pause for a moment. You're one of Haman's friends. And he's called you in. And he's telling you what a magnificent person he is. Do you think this is the first time that's happened? Probably not. Do you think you're excited to hear all of this? Give me somebody's vacation slides any day, right? Those of you who are young, some of you too young to know what vacation slides are. Ask one of the people with gray hair or no hair, and they will explain it to you after class. At any rate, I don't think they listen to him very closely. And when he talks about being unhappy, they say, oh, go build a gallows. You don't like somebody, build a gallows, hang him on and be done with it. Anything to shut him up, So now he's happy he can go make some plans. And he has those built. Then during the night before that second banquet with the queen, guess who can't sleep? This time it's the king. You ever have trouble sleeping at night, so you get up and you open a book, read a book? Something like that. Get an old copy of one of my sermons, listen to it, Something... That'll happen real quick. I love Jeff's comment one time. A friend of his was having trouble sleeping. I suggested taking some of my sermon tapes. And Jeff said, we don't need to put him in a coma. He just needs sleep. At any rate, you're the king. And when you're the king and you can't sleep, you don't get up and read. You wake somebody else up and you have them read to you. So what does he have them read? Some of his chronicles. This is kind of a way of saying, okay, let's go over the last few days or weeks and see what's been going on. And, because they're going to have details there. He's so busy, he has so many things going on, he's not going to remember everything. So he has them read all these things. And they get to the part where these two guys had decided to try to kill the king. The king found out about it through Esther by the name of a man, Mordecai. And then they go on, and the king says, wait a minute. What, did we do anything for Mordecai? I was in a business meeting one time. It was a combination of the men and the elders. And there was something that was determined in the business meeting. We're going to do this. And we voted on it. How many vote to do this? Everybody voted. Yes, we're going to do this. And I'm taking notes. You know, the preacher has to be all of these meetings to keep the minutes. And after the meeting was over, I thought, you know what? We decided to do something, but we didn't decide who was going to do it, or when, or how. And I started to say something, but the meeting was already too long. And I thought, no, nobody's going to like me calling everybody back in. So I thought, I'll just wait till next month and see what happens. And next month, that same topic came up. And one of the elders said, wait a minute, I thought we voted last month to do this. David, did we vote to do this? I said, yes. And he said, well, how come it hasn't been done? I said, because you never assigned anybody to do it. Oh, I guess we should have. So we did that time. This is what happens with the king. Did we do anything to honor Mordecai? Not anything. Oh, we've got some making up to do here. Not only to honor him, but to make up for the fact that he's been ignored during this time period. And then you hear somebody in the court. Guess who it is? Providentially, it happens to be Haman. Haman's come to discuss putting Mordecai on the gallows. So the king interrupts this. He says, bring Haman up here. Haman, there's somebody the king wants to honor. What should be done to the man the king wants to honor? What does Haman think? Who could the king want to honor but me? More than me. A little, yeah. Haman is one of these people who, if he had never been born, it's sure that the world would have wondered why. Haman's thinking this is about him. So Haman comes up with this wonderful celebration. Bring a royal robe that the king has worn, a horse that the king has ridden, and let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them array the man whom the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. We're going to have a parade. And the king said, that's a great idea. Take the robes, the horse, as you said, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who's sitting at the king's gate. Don't fall short in anything you've said. Oh my goodness. Wouldn't you have liked to have heard the sound of Haman's face falling? He is devastated. He goes and does everything that the king had said, and Mordecai goes back to the gate. This is no big deal for him. He didn't tell this to get rewarded. The king's honors mean nothing to him, especially during this particular time. And Haman goes home mourning with his head covered. And verse 13, he gets his wife together again and all his friends, and they're saying, here we go again. And then he tells them what happened to him. Well, this is different. They're listening now, aren't they? This is different. His wife says, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. Now, why does she say if Mordecai is a Jew? Because he's already told her Mordecai the Jew won't honor and respect him. She wasn't listening. She wasn't listening. Guys, it's just like when your wife comes in the room and it's 4th down on the 1-yard line in a tie game, and she tells you something very important. And you have no clue she was even there. Okay? Their minds are always so far away from Haman's talking that it didn't dawn on her. Mordecai was a Jew. He'd already told her that. But now she's listening. And she's got some bad news. She said, no, this doesn't bode well for you. What does that tell you about the people thinking about the Jews? You don't beat them. There's something special about the Jews. And so she kind of foretells something bad's going to happen. And while they're still talking, they come to take Haman to the feast. And that's where we're going to pick up in chapter 7 next week, Lord willing. This is like to be continued, isn't it? When you see a TV show and they draw you into, all right, here's somebody about to get killed, and it says to be continued next week. Who shot JR? How many of you remember watching the program when they shot JR? Did you know there was a woman in England that called the Dallas hospital to want to ask them how he was when that program aired over there? Anyway, a little free bit of trivia there that doesn't do anything for Esther. Anyway, thank you very much.
When I was in French Polynesian, little kids there kept running up and asking me if I knew JR.
If you knew JR?
Yeah.
I knew him when he used to have a genie. Yeah.